Sound check. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good evening. My name is Hank Stevenson. I'm the co-founder of the Arizona Agenda, a daily newsletter that takes readers behind the scenes in Arizona politics, and I'll be the moderator for this evening's debate. The Citizens Clean Elections Commission is the sponsor of this event. As the state's voter education agency, Clean Elections is the official sponsor of Arizona debates, so voters can have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, ask questions on the issues that matter most to them, and vote informed. All registered voters can vote in the general election, which will be held on November 5th. The voter registration deadline is October 7th, and early voting begins October 8th. Voters that are watching this debate live, you can submit a question at any time. Do that through email, debates@kc-a.com. You can text them into 408-840-8350, or you can call them in to 480-937-1253. We may not get to all audience questions, but we will do our best. Tonight, we'll be hearing from candidates for Coconino County Recorder. Candidates, you'll have about a minute for your opening and closing statements and 1 to 2 minutes for your responses to voter questions. We encourage an open exchange of dialogue between opponents. If you feel the need to respond to another candidate's comments, you may do so after they conclude speaking. I may limit responses for time management purposes, and we remind the candidates and the audience that this is a respectful, courteous, and professional environment. Our goal tonight is to connect candidates and voters so our electorate may vote informed. Okay, our candidates tonight are Democrat Aubrey Sonderegger and Republican Bob Thorpe. Let's go in alphabetical order. So, Ms. Sonderegger, why don't you start us off with some opening remarks, please?
Absolutely. Good evening. I want to start by saying thank you for having me on tonight. The Clean Elections Commission is providing a really important service to our voters here in Coconino County and across Arizona. My name is Aubrey Sonderegger, and I am your Democratic candidate for County Recorder. Coconino County has enjoyed excellent election services for decades, and with over 80% of voters of all political persuasions choosing to receive their ballot in the mail, we must ensure that this access continues in our county. I have lived in beautiful Flagstaff for nearly 15 years. My children were born here, I began a small business, and I have found friends and purpose. I am proud to call this home. In 2017, I began learning everything I could about Arizona election systems. Now, I am eager to give back to my community and serve all of the voters of Coconino County by continuing to provide accessible, fair, and safe elections. I look forward to a thoughtful discussion about this important office.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Thorpe, you're up. Tell the voters a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much, Hank. First, I'd like to also thank you as well as Clean Elections for providing this forum. I truly appreciate it. I'm former Arizona State Representative Bob Thorpe, and I'm running for Coconino County Recorder. My family and I have lived in Flagstaff and Coconino County for 21 years. I served in the state legislature for 8 years, representing 4 counties in northern Arizona. And I also served in the elections committee in the House. I was chairman of 4 committees. I also was a volunteer firefighter up here in Coconino Village for 8 years, a firefighter and EMT. And in my past, I worked at Pricewaterhouse accounting firm, where documents and maintaining a good chain of information is extremely important. I have decades of computer information technology development and experience, as well as database development. I've over a decade of management experience, and I'm currently an Arizona licensed home inspector, and I'm also an associate with the Northern Arizona Association of Realtors. I'm ready to be the next Coconino County Recorder for all citizens, independents, Democrats, and Republicans, to protect their important documents, to respect and guarantee their right to vote and run for public office, no matter their political party, to ensure that our citizens are confident in their personal votes in our county elections and that our elections are honest and trustworthy. We need good, experienced staff and volunteers that act professionally or well trained within the recorder's office as well as in the elections office. We need to be able to answer questions from the public in a prompt manner. I even think that any person that contacts the recorder's office that's angry, instead of talking to a staffer, they need to talk to the recorder directly. I'm also running to ensure, I think we've had some real problems in the recorder's office. In 2020, the recorder's office took over $600,000 from private individuals. We cannot have private money going into a department like this, a government department. And we currently have outside individuals that are actually assisting in some of the duties of that office. The office needs to be absolutely free of politics and free of influence from the outside.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, this is an elections administration position that you're applying for, so let's get right down to it. First question, do you agree that the 2020 and 2022 elections were free and fair and the results were valid? Mr. Thorpe, let's start off with you.
I haven't seen any information that would show the contrary. So I would have to agree with that statement that they were free and valid. I think, as I mentioned just a moment ago, $600,000 in the recorder's office from outside groups and how that money was used. It's never been really shown in the public as far as how that money was allocated. I've seen information that maybe one party was, some of the money was used for get out the vote efforts. Things like that just shouldn't have happened. So that might have been, things like that might have influenced the outcome of the election. But no, I don't have any hard evidence that anything nefarious occurred during those elections.
Okay. Ms. Sonderegger?
I absolutely believe that our elections were free and fair and accurate in 2020. However, I think Mr. Thorpe's statement that he believes that they are free and fair is contradicted by the fact that he signed the resolution in the legislature advocating for the fake electors in 2020, which accumulated in an immense waste of our taxpayer money. And it also resulted in a lack of faith in our election systems that carries over to this day. And his signature is on that document promoting disinformation in our state.
I would like to respond to that, Hank.
Go right ahead.
That I don't remember anywhere supporting fake electors. There is a process for the state legislature to send electors, and I know that we had some real problems in the 2020 election. And some of those people down at the Capitol are facing charges and the possibility of going to prison or jail time. And so I leave that up to our current Attorney General to make those determinations. I certainly was concerned after the 2020 election, not with Coconino County, but with the entire nation. And so, for example, states like Georgia, they have done intensive research on problems that they had in Georgia, and they've found irregularities with the voting process. I saw states, and again, not Arizona, but I saw other states where the governor and some of the officials up high in the state actually violated state law because of COVID in providing, for example, mail-in ballots where the legislature didn't have any part in it. So I have some real problems with some of the things that occurred in other states.
I'm sorry, but we are talking about Arizona, and we are talking about the fact that you signed onto a resolution that disenfranchised the voters of Coconino County and the will of the voters.
I don't remember any document that did that to Coconino County.
You don't remember signing the joint resolution of the 54th Legislature, State of Arizona, to the 116th Congress, Office of the President, Senate, stating that the undersigned have an obligation to find the truth and that they are going to appoint different legislators or different electors rather, or that they are going to uphold the election indefinitely until they find the truth with no real basis for that.
There was enough concern after 2020 that the state legislature dove into a considerable audit
Yes.
of the ballots across the state. Across the state,
There were a ton of taxpayer money, and it found no fraud, no evidence.
And so it's still important that we evaluate and do those audits. Those audits are important.
Sure. Mr. Thorpe, in hindsight, do you think that the state should have spent the time, the money, the attention that we did on the audit of the presidential election in Maricopa County, the state Senate audit of the presidential election? Was that a mistake?
I wasn't involved in that directly. By that time, I was actually out. I was out of the legislature in January of 2021. So that would be right about the time when President Biden was sworn in. So I was not involved in orchestrating that. That was the the Senate president, as well as the Speaker of the House, that made those decisions.
But you can have an opinion on whether that was a good use of our time and resources as a state or not. What is your opinion?
I think that audits are important. For example, in Cochise County, they wanted to do a hand count, and people objected and actually sued Cochise County during the 2020 election. And I think more information is good, as well as, you know, if there is any concern from the voters, and I know there's a lot of concern from voters, as well as in Maricopa County, about the election process. And so I think it's better to be to delve in and do the due diligence to make sure everything was on the up and up.
Okay. So I think there's a general agreement here that there's a lot of distrust in Arizona elections, right or wrong. But I want to ask the both of you, one, why do you think there is such distrust in Arizona elections? And two, what can you do as the Coconino County Recorder to inspire confidence in voters that when they go and cast their votes, that one, it will be counted, and two, that the entire election will be fair? And I know that's a lot, but take it from there. And Ms. Sonderegger, why don't you have the first word on this one?
Okay, I think that a lot of distrust has been generated by disinformation that's been spread. None of that disinformation and alleged fraud has found any proof in reality, but a lot of people hear that and worry, and it does erode the public's trust in our election system, which is alarming. We should all have as open and fair access to the ballot and believe that our vote is going to be counted. That is a lot that you just asked. Let's see, ways that we can improve trust in our election system. I think voter education is really key, being out there talking to people about making sure that they have a trusted source to go to. When is the election? Did my ballot get received? How, you know, we do have an open observation room for watching the tabulation process. There are a lot of securities and double checks in place to make sure that we process these ballots and these votes in a very secure and safe manner. I don't think anybody who sat down and observed this has found anything to complain about. So continuing to spread fair, truthful information, spreading the truth about what is happening with our election process and making sure that that is accessible to our voters as well, is going to be really key to reestablishing trust in our voting system.
Okay. And Mr. Thorpe, you know, why do so many people have the impression that our elections are not free and fair? And what can you do to combat that if you're elected recorder?
Well, I have a concern with the term misinformation, disinformation. I think that when people have opinions, our First Amendment, protects their right to have opinions. And over the last 4+ years, we've seen people's opinions absolutely squashed, especially in social media. Mark Zuckerberg just announced about some of the things that the White House did to basically cause Facebook to not allow disinformation and misinformation, if you will, when it came to COVID. So I think that that's a concern when government decides what is disinformation or misinformation. We need to protect people's First Amendment rights to speak. When it comes to voter confidence, education and transparency, showing people how within the department how to do their job, signature verification is extremely important. Open comms of communication with the press, with the parties, too many voters have or know people that have received ballots of people that don't live at their address, who have never lived at their address. I think that that's a huge problem when it comes to voter confidence. I was looking through the numbers earlier today. Currently in Coconino County, our voter database has about a little over 103,000 voters, but almost 6% of them, over 6,000, are inactive voters. So that alone is a concern, but then you start looking at the date of change. So in other words, how long have they been inactive? And according to our laws, after 4 years and missing 4 elections, they should be removed from the voter list, from the voter roll. So basically, there's anywhere between 4.1 and 52 years of inactive voters on our list, with, as I mentioned a moment ago, over 6,000 voters that should be removed from the voter database.
Ms. Sondrega, I saw you shaking your head there. You want to jump in?
So I've got a couple big points to make here. One, no one's opinions are being oppressed. The real problem comes in when misinformation and disinformation are conveyed as the truth, as fact, when in fact there is no evidence backing up those opinions. And when people believe those opinions to be fact, when they believe that they are coming from reliable sources, that breeds distrust, that disenfranchises a lot of people because they don't understand what their rights are, what is true, what isn't true. Second, an inactive voter is not an illegal voter. It is not.
I didn't say that.
I understand, but an inactive voter is not an illegal voter. It is not somebody who is somehow not eligible to vote simply because they have not chosen to vote for a period of time. Again, when people don't trust the system, oftentimes they don't choose to vote. That should not demand that they get kicked off the voter rolls and no longer have the option to vote.
There are, for example, there are 17 voters that have been inactive for between 30 and 52 years. They've been inactive. Yes, it is. I looked it up. You need to look it up then. Do you have a copy of the voter database?
Where's your source?
So I looked it up in the voter database. I did a search on that. And so there's 96 that have been active between 20 and 30 years, 623 inactive between 10 and 20 years, 5,254 between 4.1 years and 10 years. So by state law, if those people have not voted in the last 4 elections, they need to be sent a notice and basically asked, do you want to remain on the voter database? And if there's no reply, more likely than not, they don't live there anymore or they've passed away or something, but they shouldn't be on the voter database.
Give the names to the recorder. Give those names to the recorder.
Oh, I'm more than happy to share. Well, the recorder should know all that information that I just said, and they should be doing something about it. I mean, when one voter hasn't done anything in 52 years, I mean, come on, really?
Okay, I want to ask a little bit about, besides the opinions of people, the beliefs of people, whatever those may be, about how people feel about our elections. I want to ask, and I think that you're kind of hinting at this, Mr. Thorpe, what policies can you as recorder put in place to ensure that our elections are in fact safe and secure? If anything is necessary, sounds like Mr. Thorpe, you're talking about cleaning up the voter rolls. What else?
Well, if voters have questions, we need to make it really simple, and we need to have our people as well as the recorder trained to be able to answer those questions. If voters have recommendations to make our voting system more secure and feel more confident in the voter system, we need to take those ideas into consideration. So, in other words, we need to have the ability to have open dialogue. Some of the things that other reporters are doing throughout our state is, for example, going on TV. Unfortunately, we don't have local TV to do that, but we do have local radio where they can do maybe a monthly meeting and talk about the elections process, being registered to vote, things that voters need to understand. And then going to the parties, for example, going to the Democrat, for me as a Republican, going to the Democrat Party and doing a presentation with a Q&A afterwards, trying to do the same with any groups of independents if they group together, as well as with Republicans. To have that open dialogue, to be as transparent as possible. One thing that is not, my understanding is it's not required by law, is cameras for the recorder's office when they're actually processing votes. So if I'm elected, I definitely want cameras where the public can go onto those cameras and view the process. And of course, volunteers. Our volunteers are so incredibly important for accurate and smooth voting. We need to encourage volunteers from all parties to be involved.
Okay. Ms. Sondrager, what, if anything, can you do as recorder to ensure, not that just people feel that our elections are fair and secure, but that they actually are as fair and secure as can be? What
Absolutely. I agree with the majority of what Mr. Thorpe said. In his assessment, we do need to continue to expand our outreach and our education policies, our ability to touch the community and hear from the community. I'm losing my train of thought here, but I do agree that we need to continue to increase access to the recorder's office and understanding of the recorder's office. Currently, as far as the actual security of our vote goes, the vote is extremely secure. It has, I think, one of the biggest things that people worry about and that have been, the red flags have been raised around drop boxes. And this is one of the things that's been attacked as not safe. Drop boxes are always posted on government property. They are bolted to the concrete. They're in an area where there is 24-hour surveillance. There are fire suppressants within the drop boxes, and the ballots in those boxes are collected every single day by a bipartisan team of election workers and brought into the office. So I think the more people understand the process, the more secure they will know that that process actually is.
Okay, so I wanted there.
If I could reply real quickly. So I'm concerned with drop boxes. I don't have any evidence, so we've had problems here in Coconino County, but there has been reports across the country of people showing up at a drop box and dropping in 10, 20, 30 ballots, which should never happen. We passed laws when I was down at the legislature so that if, for example, I can imagine a Navajo elder out on the Navajo Nation who can't physically make it to a mailbox or come into town to drop off their ballot, so they can hand it to their grandson, for example, to bring it in for them. And I completely support things like that, but we need to ensure that these drop boxes are not abused. I don't recall the legislature ever approving drop boxes, and I don't recall the supervisors ever approving drop boxes. So I'm unsure, other than COVID occurring, I'm unsure where we all of a sudden needed these drop boxes everywhere. We have the ability to drop a ballot, an early ballot in the mail. We have the ability, my wife and I, what we do is we drive up to the recorder's office and drop it in the mailbox that they have right there in the parking lot at the recorder's office. So, I'm concerned if the system is abused, if people are collecting or ballot harvesting, which is illegal here in Arizona. But I'm concerned about those kinds of things. We want to ensure that our elections are honest and that there's integrity.
They are. And there are cameras on those drop boxes. And there is an awareness of how many people live within a precinct and an expected number of drop boxes. If we see an excessive number of drop ballots show up in a drop box, we are going to have some red flags go up on that. And we are going to be checking the camera footage on that. There are also no drop boxes located on the Navajo Nation at all. And, people need options. The more options we have, we are an extremely diverse rural community. There are a lot of people that have a hard time getting to a mailbox or getting to a polling place on election day. The more options that people have to vote, the better our election systems work.
And we got a lot of questions from voters about drop boxes. I think we just got a pretty good lay of the land on how you both feel about drop boxes, but I do want to clarify a point for the voters here. Mr. Thorpe, would you advocate for getting rid of drop boxes in Coconino County?
I would need to research that and talk with voters about it and just make sure. I don't want to inconvenience voters. In other words, if that's the only way a voter can get their ballot submitted for voting, I can see a real benefit there. But at the same time, there's no cost to the voter to drop it into a mailbox. So, for example, the West Side Walmart has a mailbox sitting right there where a voter can drop their ballot into that mailbox. They can take it to the post office and drop it off. They can take it up to the recorder's office and drop it off as well. So I would like to know more about the history of how we got to this point of having drop boxes. And at the same time, for places like Moenkopi, for the Navajo Nation, for the Hopi Nation, we need to figure out, are those citizens, is there an imposition for them to vote? We certainly do not want that. We want to make registering to vote for people outside the greater Flagstaff area as easy as possible, and for them to be able to cast their vote confidently and as easy as possible.
And Ms. Songwriter, sorry, go ahead.
Just one quick point. When people drop a ballot into a drop box, that ballot gets touched by the voter and by the election team picking it up. When you drop it into a mailbox, it is going to get to the recorders, but it goes all the way down to Phoenix, and it gets touched by the people, the mail people, the distribution center, by the people in the post office in Phoenix, and comes back up. There are plenty of spaces where and mail voting should be an option, but you need to know that drop boxes in many ways are even more secure than dropping your ballot in a mailbox.
And Mr. Thorpe, I don't want to go too far down this road, but a lot of these questions, I'm going to read one of these actually, because it's really good.
Absolutely.
Audience. I'm concerned about the erosion of voting rights, which seems to be occurring on a national basis. Currently in Coconino County, we enjoy the benefits of early voting, mail-in ballots, and drop boxes located to ensure people in remote areas have the chance to vote. And here we're getting to the question of it. I enjoy getting my ballot early so I can easily research candidates and issues before casting my ballot. What can we do to make sure these rights remain intact in the face of pressure to reform voting laws? And I specifically want to ask you, because I think we've touched on a lot of these, but ask you, Mr. Thorpe, Would you ever advocate for getting rid of mail-in voting, as many of your Republican colleagues at the Capitol have?
Goodness, my wife and I really appreciate the early ballots. And so for me personally, no, I wouldn't want to change that. Mail-in voting, I believe that here in Arizona, when you think about it, it's grown to roughly 80% of our ballots come in as mail-in ballots, or early ballots, I should say. I think we've had it since like the 1990s. So what here in Coconino County, there's no way that our elections officials or a recorder is going to change that. If the state legislature decides to make a change like that, then that's something that they would have to do. The governor would have to sign those changes as well. But no, I don't foresee. Like I said, me and my wife personally, we really like having an early ballot. But if I could also throw one other caveat, early ballots also have some negative aspects as well. If you vote early for someone and then you change your mind, or let's say that person drops out, it's difficult, almost impossible to then change your vote. So you need to think about, there's pros and cons associated with early ballots. The day of voting, of course, I was at one of the polling places at the primary, and we didn't have a lot of people coming in. But yet, day of voting, everything is current. You're voting for the people that are still legitimate candidates. You can make your decision right there and then, and not feel any regret afterwards.
Okay, and Ms. Sonderegger, feel free to riff off of that, but a lot of these kind of roll into the same kinds of themes. We've got questions about, how do we protect our voting rights? And especially in this area, there are a lot of questions about not only how do we protect our voting rights in Coconino County, but especially on, the Navajo reservation where, as you mentioned, there are just not the number of options in many cases as there are elsewhere. So I guess to narrow that down a bit, what can we do to make it easier for tribal nation members to vote is one of the questions that came in along these lines from a voter.
Sure. One of the great services that we have started and I think could be expanded even further is that we have a mobile vote service on the Navajo Nation. We take a trailer with our voting registration and with office officials out to different locations and chapter houses around the Navajo Nation and advertise what days we will be at what locations. And this helps people be able to drop off their ballot if a mailbox or a post office is too far away. It helps them be able to turn in their ballot by hand and make sure that that ballot gets where it needs to go. That's been a really wonderful program that I hope we can expand on. We need to continue to expand the ability, drive to the polls, be able to help transport people, and perhaps native languages on the polling, on the ballots or available to translate would also help. So I don't know how much of that the recorder's office can actually do. We do have an outreach branch in our office that works with the Navajo Nation, and I would rely very heavily on their feedback and input on what ways we need to continue to expand access for our Native voters.
Okay.
I don't have any disagreement with any of that. I've been at Loop during elections on election day. And of course, quite a few people go to the elementary school there and vote. If they are using early ballots, they now have a huge number of post office boxes at the chapter house available for people to both pick up their mail and send their mail. One of the big concerns that we definitely have to stay on top of when it comes to Native Americans voting is oftentimes they'll have two addresses that are different addresses. For example, they might live in Loop, but their mail goes to Tuba City. So we certainly want to make sure that our voting databases are accurate so that if they want an early ballot, that we're sending it to the proper address. Goodness, I had a problem sending some mail down to Munns Park, just down the road on off I-17, about 20 miles, and was unable to send mail to people living within Munns Park. For two different people I tried to send mail to. So I think the Navajo Nation, the Hopi Nation have even greater challenges, and we certainly at the Recorder's Office, we need to be able to really understand those challenges and make sure that we find the easiest path to make sure that they're a valid voter and that they're receiving an early ballot to the right address.
Absolutely. And addressing is a huge problem for our Native populations. A lot of times these people live somewhere that doesn't have an official street name or address, and it's very difficult to properly register these people to vote. There have been some programs that we've seen in Utah and some other areas that use geocoding to provide them with a legitimate location that they have as their home address. Some of those sorts of programs would be great to implement and make sure that we are providing accessible voting option to our Native people.
Coconino County's GIS department their job is to ensure that people's addressing is correct for the places that they live. But yes, again, each individual voter needs to decide what they want to list as their home address and their mail to address.
Interesting. All right. I want to ask you a little bit. This position is open because longtime recorder Patty Hansen is retiring after many years on the job. And I'd like to ask you both to give your evaluation of her job performance and what you think the office should do better or just differently. And Ms. Sonderegger, why don't we start with you?
I think Patty has provided drama-free, stress-free election services. She's provided an excellent amount of information about the ballot, where you're registered to vote. There's a little four-fold pamphlet that goes out to every voter in Coconino County that provides all sorts of information about your precinct, where your voting locations are going to be, how many people are registered of each party, kind of give you a whole map of your county and of your voting options. And it's just a really informative piece of literature. And I think that's been wonderful. I don't have any complaints about how our election systems have been run up here in Coconino County since I've been a voter here.
And anything you would do differently for Ms. Hansen?
I don't know that I do things differently. There's always room to expand on services that you can provide for people. There is always room to improve and move with the times. We do need to continue to stay on top of any security threats, which our Secretary of State has been excellent on making sure that we are on top of and have trained our county recorders and other election officials on how to handle our security. But that is certainly something that needs to stay on top of, that we need to stay on top of. And I think maybe I'd like to expand our ability to do outreach to different voting communities in the county.
Okay. Mr. Thorpe, what do you think of the job that Ms. Hansen's done, and what would you do differently or better even?
I've attended groups that, for example, about a month and a half ago, we had some officials from the elections department, so not the recorder's office, they came in and were absolutely terrific as far as explaining some of the ins and outs and also trying to enlist volunteers to work on elections. And I was really impressed, but I haven't seen anything like that from the recorder's office. So I think that outreach and going out, actually seeing Patty come to meetings would have been really, really nice. And so if I'm elected recorder, that's not one of the things I would want to do. I'd like to do at least every month, go out to groups, go out to, for example, like the Lions Club and others, both political and non-political groups, and try to talk about the importance of our election system. There was an article that Daily Sun talked about talking about the elections office and concerns, as I mentioned earlier, about the 600,000 of dark money that came into the recorder's office and how it was used. I don't think Patty did a very good job being upfront about the money that was received in the recorder's office, why private money would be coming in the office, and then the office has continued to have an association with some outside groups. And so I don't really think that that's appropriate. We need to completely compartmentalize what happens within the recorder's office. We shouldn't be influenced by outside groups at all. Matter of fact, the recorder's office should have absolutely zero politics. I don't believe, if I were a recorder, I don't believe I would do any staffing changes at all. But I would want to make sure that everybody understands that any voter, any candidate, it doesn't matter what their party is, what their affiliation is, needs to be treated with the utmost of respect. And there is no politics within the office itself. We have to be absolutely neutral and unbiased when it comes to the way the office is run. The office is for the good of our citizens. One concern I have is now that COVID is kind of in our rearview mirror, when you go to the recorder's office, unlike prior to COVID, you have to press a button and actually talk through a microphone to tell them what you want to do. It's supposed to be a public building. I'm really concerned that we've reduced access to that public building, that the public is really no longer that welcome. They have to go through a formality. Once I got inside the office, I was picking up some voter registration forms. The young lady behind the desk for the recorder's office was absolutely amazing. And so her training was top notch, her ability to talk about how to register people, the kinds of ID that are required, things like that. Absolutely stellar. So I really applaud the office for that.
Okay.
So one quick thing, the office is in a building that shares offices with 4 other county offices, and these are policies that are decided on within the offices within the building. It is not simply the recorder's choice, and there are good reasons, both directions, to be thinking about whether or not that is an open door policy or whether there is a security to let people in.
Well, it used to be an open door policy prior to COVID. So I'm not, and I keep wondering when it's going to change back. And so it's unfortunate. So for example, if the county attorney has a concern with people coming up to the 3rd floor to their office, then maybe the buzz-in should be prior to getting to the county attorney's office. But the recorder's office, and people coming in because they want to get, for example, a registration form or ask information about the elections process, that should be open door. They should be able to just walk right into that building.
For many of our county offices, it is a security issue for our election workers, for our office workers in our county offices, and honestly, that again is not a decision that is made solely by the recorder's office. There are 4 other offices that share that building.
Okay. I want to ask, I've got a couple of great audience questions here. The deal, I think, that should give voters a little bit of insight into your thinking, I hope. The first of which is just, of all the elected positions for which you could have run, why did you choose county recorder? And Ms. Sonderegger, why don't you kick it off?
I didn't necessarily want to run for elected office. I was really content working behind the scenes, doing good work in our communities. The recorder's office really speaks to me in this broad picture that democracy, voting is the bedrock of our democracy. And protecting our ability to vote is protecting our ability to have representation by the people, for the people. It's one of those big picture offices that you don't focus on politics or policy. You simply focus on administering a service to your community. And again, it is one of our most fundamental rights to be able to vote for who we want to represent us. It's a really huge responsibility and a powerful responsibility and an honor to be able to serve a group of people with that assurance that that service can be provided and is going to be safely and fairly administered.
And how about you, Mr. Thorpe?
So my background here in Northern Arizona, as I mentioned earlier, I was a volunteer firefighter for about 8 years, had to go through the fire academy, tried to give back to my community. At D. Miguel Elementary School, I spent about 2.5 years as a crossing guard and a tutor to the children. And, my wife always gets after me and says, "Oh, don't write down that you're a crossing guard," but yet, I wanted the kids to be safe, and I wanted the parents to be respectful as they drove and dropped off their kids. I spent 8 years down at the state legislature. I put in about 250,000 miles. People have asked me to run for that office again, but when county recorder came up, it's extremely important. It's interesting. You asked the question earlier about eliminating early ballots. If we did that, a huge amount of work for the county recorder would go away, and for that office would go away if we went back to polling place day of voting. But right now we're looking at roughly 80%. So people like using our early ballots. I come from a database background. I've written, and actually I ran a company. I started my own company the software products were based on databases. And so having accurate databases when it comes to our voter rolls, as well as with recording important documents. Those are all things that I think are a great challenge, and I'm very interested in getting involved in. A lot of people see the commercials about voter fraud, about title fraud in their homes. And so my understanding about our laws is we cannot, for example, if a quick claim deed comes in for somebody's home, we cannot refuse that document. But I would like to make a system where we can immediately have recorded in the database, let's say a cell phone number, where we can text that individual or send an email to that individual that actually has that property and ask them the question, just like a credit card company, ask them the question, have you approved these changes to your title? So most people, the most expensive, the most valuable thing in their life is their home. And so we need to ensure, as we're recording important documents for the public, that those documents, that fraudulent and nefarious things don't happen to those documents. And we need to try to create as many safeguards as possible. Now, as a former state legislator, I know how to go down to the Capitol, open bill folders, work with the other recorders when laws need to be updated or new laws need to be created to make our voting system safer and to make it easier for people to vote. So I know that process. I've lived it, and I'm more than happy to continue doing that as recorder.
I know that it is not the recorder's job to update laws. It is the recorder's job to adhere to the laws that are in place, to potentially advocate for laws that they would like to see build the recorder's ability to serve their community. But it is not our job to write laws.
It is not our job to write laws. However, if there is a problem, and problems come up on almost a yearly basis where we need to improve the voting process, the timing, things like that. And so to be able to do that, you have to be able to open up a bill folder work with the legislature, both the House and the Senate and the governor's office, to make the case that laws need to be updated or new laws need to occur that make our voting system more secure and makes it easier for our voters to actually cast their votes and for people to run for office. So what does that mean? That means having an understanding of how to work with our legislature to get those things done.
And Ms. Sonderegger, actually, this is one of the questions on the list here. I want to just direct this one to you. Are there policies that you would like to see the state legislature change that you would use the bullet pulpit that comes with this office to advocate for? Are there any specific laws that you want to see passed from the legislature, or certainly not passed, I would assume is the case more often?
You know, right now we have a rather discriminatory law that just got approved on the books, in which somebody cannot fill out a regular voter form, and if they do not have the full state ID with them and proof of citizenship and proof of residency, that voter registration form doesn't get put into a federal only voter space. It gets thrown out. And so people who intend to register to vote are suddenly disenfranchised and not registered to vote. And I would love to see that law changed so that we can continue to have an equal playing field for people who have expressed an interest to vote. Making sure that we have an adequate time to cure ballots after an election has happened would be a huge thing. Making sure that people who think they've voted and maybe there's something wrong, maybe they forgot to sign their ballot. We need to be able to reach those people and make sure that they intended to vote and be able to cure ballots after elections. I would love to see a lot more access to the ballot and a lot more fairness in counting our ballots. Those are a couple that come to mind off the top of my head that I would advocate to see improvements on. Student voting. Right now, I know that Mr. Thorpe was pushing bills to make it so that dorm addresses wouldn't count as an address in which you could vote and register to vote. The people that come to go to school in our state are absolutely valid, legal voters, and they should have access to the vote just the same as everybody else, whether they are at that address for 6 months, 12 months, 2 years, it doesn't matter. You can register to vote where you live.
And I do want to talk specifically about that bill. That was a 2020 bill, if I remember correctly. That yes,
yeah, let me discuss that as well as others. So the Supreme Court just ruled that we can go ahead with the ID requirements here in Arizona. So, for example,
sorry,
yes.
I want to hear more about the dorm voting bill.
I'm going to get to that as well. So because I haven't addressed the Supreme Court issue, so that if somebody tries to get register at the state level with a registration form and does not have proper ID, they basically have to re-register. If they're not going to provide an ID, they have to register as a federal voter. In other words, being able to vote for our U.S. House, Senate, and the presidency. So we still do have a requirement for ID when it comes to our state and federal ballots. Now, and so that was at the Supreme Court level. So I don't believe that the state legislature or the governor can necessarily defy what the U.S. Supreme Court has said with that. But I'm not even sure whether what the Supreme Court has come out with is just a temporary fix or whether it will continue and our state legislature has to address it. I had numerous people here in Flagstaff in particular that were very concerned with our students on the university. So if somebody moves to another location within the state, their domicile has changed. And ADOT requires that, I think it's within 7 to 10 days, they have to update their driver's license information. So, for example, if a student is coming from, let's say, Tucson, and they come to school at NAU, and their driver's license says that they're from Tucson, it makes sense to the people that have approached me that they should, if they want an early ballot, that they should receive a Tucson ballot to vote, because that's where their family is from, that's where they're from, that's where their friends are. So shouldn't they be engaged in voting there in Tucson? You think about if somebody is moving to Flagstaff, ADOT requires 7 to 10 days, I believe, that they need to update their driver's license. So I do not want to, when I was trying to run that bill, I do not want to restrict a student's ability to vote. I absolutely want them to vote. However, if they're not from Flagstaff, then their vote might be basically invalidating somebody who lives in Flagstaff year-round, year after year after year. So doesn't it make sense? This is the argument that's been brought to my attention. Doesn't it make sense that a student from outside of Coconino County should receive a ballot from where they live, from where they're from their domicile? That's what was asked. That's what our citizens asked me to do, and that's what I tried to do.
Okay, Ms. Gregor, I know you want to respond to this, but give me just one moment here.
Yeah.
Sure.
A follow-up. A lot of that was people wanted me to. This is what I was asked. This point was made. Do you agree with this? Do you stand by that bill? Would you advocate for it if it were pushed in the legislature today?
I think it makes sense. And I think it makes sense from the standpoint of a student, as I mentioned a moment ago. A student comes from Tucson. They're in Flagstaff for 6 months, let's say, going to university. What happens at the end of that term here at the university? They return to Tucson. So doesn't it, from a logical standpoint, doesn't it make sense that if they want an early ballot, let's give them a Tucson early ballot, send it to their dorm address? I have absolutely no problem with that. But I think that there are people here in Flagstaff in particular that feel like their vote is being compromised when somebody doesn't live in Flagstaff year round, and yet they're voting like they live here year round, and as I mentioned, potentially canceling out their vote. And so that's why the idea was brought to my attention.
Okay, I would ask about snowbirds, but I think Ms. Saunders wants to get into this too.
I am indeed going to ask about snowbirds and military personnel and folks that do not live at an address 12 months out of the year. And are they somehow less valid to vote in issues? When a student moves up to NAU, they are living in Coconino County. They are living in Flagstaff. They have every right to vote where they live and to be considered equal citizens, as do snowbirds, as do military personnel who may be living overseas. It is an unnecessary obstacle to make it harder to vote by requiring that somebody have an address 12 months out of the year.
I don't really understand when you say it's an obstacle. So a student from Tucson wants to vote and they receive a ballot from Tucson. I don't see that as being an obstacle. They're voting with issues that concern their family, concern their friends, concern their community from where they're from. ADOT says
they
that
have the right to register to vote where they live, regardless of where they grew up.
ADOT says that your driver's license shows your domicile. It's where you live. So if a student has a driver's license that says Tucson, then their domicile is in Tucson. So that's what was brought to my attention.
I know.
And when it comes to military people, absolutely, of course, as they're moving around the country and moving around the world, if they want to continue voting and their domicile is here in Flagstaff, absolutely, they should receive an early ballot. If a snowbird lives here in Flagstaff and their domicile is here in Flagstaff, absolutely, if they
So
want
what's the difference between a
if they-
snowbird or a military personnel and a student? What's the
There's no
difference?
difference between a snowbird and a military person or anyone else. You could have an individual who lives in Flagstaff who all of a sudden gets a 6-month job in North Carolina, but they want to continue voting in Flagstaff. They should be able to get a ballot from Coconino County that allows them to vote here. But when somebody is here, and the argument that was made to me, when somebody is here as a student and they live 6 months out of the year, their domicile is in another location, doesn't it make sense that they receive an early ballot from that location?
Well, I think we have very clearly heard what your opinion on this issue is. And I know, Hank, that we are out of time and we are running over time. So I want to respect everybody's time in this debate.
Well, let's get through a few more questions. What are the qualities that you believe are the 2 qualities that you believe are essential for someone serving as recorder? And Ms. Sonderegger, why don't you kick that off?
Keep starting with me. Let's see, 2 qualities that.
Why don't you kick that off then? Mr. Thorpe?
Yeah.
Why don't you take that one away?
Sure. 2 qualities. You're running a department and you're managing people and you're managing processes. So you need to have professional experience doing that. I feel that having a background in IT and database, because this is a department that runs on databases. When you're recording a home deed, it's recorded in a computer system. When you have a voter database, it's a database and you need to maintain that database. So understanding both the computer IT as well as the management aspects are extremely important to running this department successfully. And then you I'm sure have received notes in the mail from some company, maybe it's a health company, that their systems have been breached. So understanding security issues and ensuring that bad actors do not come in and attack our data, and making sure that we have regular backups of our data and that those backups are secure. Without our voter database, you think about, we have over 100,000 people in our voter database. What if that database disappeared tomorrow? We'd be in pretty bad shape. So we need to take all that seriously and manage it correctly.
Okay, database management, IT. How about you, Ms. Sonderegger?
And managing a department and managing people.
What do you think are the skills that are essential to a job like this?
I think, I don't know if we call it a skill, but a spirit of service to our community. I think it's really important that we approach this as a service job to every single constituent in our county. These are records and services that are deeply impact people's lives on a daily basis. Our home records, our land records, and our ability to vote touches everyone on a regular basis. And the spirit of service and the spirit of making sure that we have access to that is deeply important. I also think it is important to have, I do have a background in managing people, and I think that's important, but I also think it's important to have a spirit of innovation and making sure that we are meeting the moment as the world changes and advocating for best practices, learning how to do better, and better provide those services in our community.
Okay. I think this is an important one, and I realize we are going a little bit over time here, but we're
good.
having fun, so let's just keep it rolling. But
Sure.
I think Question from a voter: how will you address instances of voter intimidation and especially threats to election workers, which we've seen certainly on the rise in recent years? And Mr. Thorpe, you want to start us off on this one?
Yeah, I remember a situation number of years ago. I think it might have been the first year when Obama was running, and there were people dressed in black with clubs outside of a voter precinct. And you talk about intimidation. And so, goodness, I believe in being respectful to people. And so, in other words, we need to do everything we can. You think about the politics that are dividing people these days. We need to do everything we can, me as an individual, my family, my community, to try to be respectful, try to tone down some of the contentious dialogue. I know of people that refuse to have Thanksgiving meals together because of divisiveness associated with politics. And we need to get back to a point, and I certainly think that I need to play a role in that, to try to get people to be respectful to one another. And then, back to my example, and it doesn't have anything to do with, the heritage of the individuals, but the idea that somebody would be standing out in front of a voting place with a club. Wow, that's the ultimate in trying to disenfranchise somebody from voting. We absolutely can't allow that kind of activity. We need to have a great relationship with our law enforcement. Just make sure that people feel comfortable and confident to be able to go vote and to express themselves. If they put a bumper sticker in the car that you don't agree with, we need to be tolerant of one another.
And Ms. Sonderegger, how will you, protect the voters and your staff if elected to this position?
I think particularly around election time, those closed doors to make sure that people are not walking into a building with weapons, with intent to harm, is a very important policy. I think it's really important that we work with the sheriff's department and our local law enforcement and make sure that those 75-foot from a polling location rules are in place. A lot of this is in the elections department, not the recorder's office right now. And so if we get reports of people standing around monitoring what's happening at a drop box, we need to make sure that we are working with our law enforcement and that those people are not permitted to continue to intimidate, because drop boxes are considered polling locations and those need to have that 75 feet respected. Within government areas and within polling locations, we need to make sure that we don't have partisan bumper stickers, t-shirts, people like advocating for a particular party and making somebody feel uncomfortable with their right to vote, to drop off a ballot, to participate in our election. Another really important one is to do our best to recruit Indigenous poll workers for our native lands. A lot of times people feel intimidated by white people working at their polling locations because there is so much cultural discrimination that happens. That's another one that I think could be really helpful in increasing voter participation and voters feeling safe participating.
I was at the last Loop chapter meeting, and there was a presentation by a gentleman from Coconino County Elections, and he was a Navajo gentleman, and he spoke almost his entire presentation about voting and registering to vote was done in Navajo, which I truly appreciated.
Cool. All right, we're getting towards the end here, so why don't we move on to closing comments? I think we started with Miss Sonderegger, so let's do that again so that she gets the first word, and Mr. Thorpe, you'll have the final word here.
Okay. I want to close with the fact that voting is really our most fundamental constitutional right, and the more participation that we have, the better our democracy works. I understand our early voting system, and I have studied the office and the elections manual. I am aware that mail ballots are immensely popular with Arizona voters, and that early voting facilitates participation and educated voting. I'm committed to continuing to innovate and expand access to the vote in our county for all of our eligible voters. I know that fraud is vanishingly rare, and that there is a robust security system in place to catch those who do try to cheat. I believe in our election systems and that they are fair. I do not need to fabricate unfounded conspiracies that waste taxpayer money and scare people away from the polls. And I promise to uphold the results of our elections and the will of the people, no matter the outcome. You do have a choice this November. I am honored to be considered for your next county recorder, and I pledge to responsibly administer the vital services of the office. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I hope you all have a wonderful voting experience this year.
Thank you so much, Ms. Sonderegger. All right, Mr. Thorpe, final words.
Hank, it's so good to see you. And thank you. I really appreciate you moderating this evening, and I appreciate Clean Elections. Wouldn't it be nice if Clean Elections could provide, the $5, signature pages, allowing, for example, countywide candidates to be able to take advantage of clean election money? That would be great, just like they do at the state level, as well as at the governor and elsewhere. I take this position of county recorder very seriously. I believe that we need somebody that has an extensive background in management, both managing people as well as managing processes. I believe that we need somebody that has IT experience and really understands databases and the threats that our electronic systems face on a daily basis. We need to ensure that people have confidence in the voting system. And if we all of a sudden got hacked right before or right after this next election, that would certainly drop the confidence level of our voters as far as our voting process here in Coconino County. So we need to do everything that we can to make voting easy, to make sure that people feel that the results are coming in quickly, in a timely manner, that they have confidence that the results are accurate, and that our voting system is honest and fair. There's nothing more fundamental to our constitutional American system, our American Republic, than voting. And so I truly believe that we can increase the confidence level, and we can make sure that every single citizen in Coconino County, irregardless of their party affiliation, can feel like our elections are fair and honest and reliable, and something they can have confidence in.
All right. Well, that's all we've got tonight. This concludes our debate, and I want to say thank you so much to our candidates for participating in this democratic system. To the voters, thank you, all of you who took the time to watch the debate and inform yourselves before the November 5th general election. And please visit azcleanelections.gov for official, accurate voting information. Thank you so much again, candidates, for your time.
Thank you,
Hank.